Houston Texans had a somewhat disappointing 2024 season, so in today's video, I want to talk about why this 2025 version of the Houston Texans will be much improved from what they were last year. Subscribe and like the video if you guys do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So we are going to begin by talking about what happened last year, then we'll talk about the offseason, and then at the very end, we'll talk about what the 2025 season might look like for the Texans. Last year, as we all know, the Houston Texans made the playoffs, and they would be a pretty quick exit within the playoffs. However, statistically speaking, this team was not terrible. They ranked 18th in points per game, 16th in yards per game, and 21st in touchdowns per game. They were poor in the red zone and about, league average on third down. They were about league average in running the football, and they were also about league average in passing the football. The only thing they weren't league average in was their quarterback sack percentage, which was the 30th highest in the league. Defensively speaking, they were really solid, only giving up 21.4 points per game, which is the 10th best in the league, giving up 307.5 opponents' yards per game, which was the second best, and the 12th best opponents' touchdowns per game rates. They were great on third down, but not so great in the red zone. They were awesome, a top 10 unit in run defense, and they were about a top 10 unit as well in pass defense as well. Overall, I think there's a lot of different ways you can take this conversation when you talk about the 2024 Houston Texans. On one hand, you did kind of see a bit of a decline from CJ Stroud, but you can also kind of point the blame and point the reasoning for that decline on a couple different reasons. For starters, the offensive line for the Houston Texans last year was just not very good. Constantly, there was pressure on the quarterback. CJ Stroud was having a really hard time navigating the pocket because of just how bad that offensive line was. And it felt like as the season went on, it felt like CJ started to lose trust within that unit. And I think when you start to lose trust in your offensive line, you speed up your process, your progressions aren't so smooth, and you end up being a little bit inaccurate too. And I think that's kind of what we saw from CJ. I also think there was some regression within Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, who's now gone from the team. Now, I don't want to sit here and pretend like I know everything about what happened with Bobby Slowick, but from what I have heard and read from Texans fans and from Texans forums, it sounded like Bobby Slowick was somebody who had a lot of great ideas and his play calling was smart, but he never had a counter to certain things. If it worked, the play was a genius, and it made Bobby Slowick look like an incredible offensive coordinator. But once a defensive coordinator adjusted and made some changes, there wasn't really that adjustment period from a guy like Bobby. It also sounds like he was pretty much in control of a lot of different things on the offense, including the offensive line. So that is also a bit of an issue. But now they brought in a new offensive coordinator in Nick Caley, who actually was, I think, the passing game coordinator for the LA Rams for a few years, and now he's going to be the offensive coordinator for the Texans. From what I have heard, he's going to give more control to CJ Stroud, allowing him to work the offensive line and allowing him to fix some of the issues that he sees. I personally really like this hire. I think he potentially could be a lot better than Bobby. Now, defensively speaking, last year this was a great unit, and I think just this year they've gotten even better, so it'll be a top 10 unit again next year. But with that said, that's kind of what happened in 2024. Let's now move on to the offseason. We will begin with free agency, and yes, this is their entire free agency right here. So many things to go over here. Let's just quickly run through them. You signed tackle Cam Robinson, Sheldon Rankins, Darrell Taylor, Lincoln Tomlinson, a new kick returner and Tremont Smith, Nick Neiman, EJ Speed, Trent Brown, Ronald Darby, Braxton Berrios, and a number of other players here as well. You also made some trades for Ed Ingram, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Christian Kirk. You re-signed a whole bunch of players, probably the biggest one being Derek Barnett, who was really good for you. And then you also extended cornerback Derek Stingley. And that offensive line last year that was abysmal, well, they traded away Laramie Tunsil, they traded away Kenyon Green, and they got rid of Shaq Mason. So a lot to go over here. We'll begin with talking about what they actually did in terms of getting rid of some of the pieces they had last year. Primarily Laramie Tunsil, which I'll put most of my focus on. I think Laramie Tunsil's a good player, and I think last year he kind of had a bit of a down season in terms of penalties and things like that. But at the same time, he was still very much the best offensive lineman in that room. Now, I have heard that the reasoning for why they traded Laramie Tunsil was because of the culture fit. They did not feel like he was much of a leader within the room. And while I understand that, and I can totally understand wanting to build a culture, wanting to get leadership in every single room, I understand that. My personal opinion of this is I think it was too soon. If you wanted to do that next year, then okay. But as of right now, this is a team that is trying to contend for championships, and you just got rid of what was probably your best offensive lineman. Now, to be fair to the Houston Texans, I think they've done a fine job of finding some temporary solutions for that offensive line to replace Laramie Tunsil and to replace some of the guys they lost. But this was already a bottom 5 offensive line last year. You just got rid of arguably your best offensive lineman, and the guys you brought in to replace Laramie Tunsil and so on and so forth I wouldn't say are as good as Laramie. So on one hand, I think that they probably should just kept Laramie Tunsil for one more year, try to extend this window for a third year with CJ Stroud. And then if it doesn't work out with Laramie, if he doesn't develop to become a leader, you trade him next offseason. And then at that stage, you try to draft an offensive tackle with probably a top 20 pick or so. The Laramie Tunsil move to me was the only like big time questionable decision. But in terms of what they actually did in free agency, in terms of signing players, I thought they did a pretty fine job. Now, this is a extensive class of players they brought in. Cam Robinson will probably be your left tackle. He's solid. He's not better than Laramie Tunsil. He struggles with penalties sometimes and holds and stuff like that, but he's still solid enough. Sheldon Rankins, more of a one-year rental up the middle. Darrell Taylor, he's got some legit juice. You just kind of hope you can tap into it. He has potential, more of a depth option right now. Laken Tomlinson at guard, I really hope he doesn't start this year because he's just not very good, but he's a veteran. He's been there. He's done that. So I guess he's okay. EJ Speed has been a long-term starter for the Colts. He's going to come in here and provide depth and provide a potential starter. Same thing with Nick Neiman. Trent Brown, another veteran offensive tackle. Big dude, has been around in the league for quite some time, but he's not a long-term answer there. So a lot of the pieces they brought in free agency, I don't feel like they're going to be long-term players on this team. Like the only player that I think that at least stands out to me right now that can be a long-term part of this team is like Darrell Taylor. But even him, he's only on like a one-year deal. Everyone else here to me seems to be like a one-year rental, like a depth option or a depth piece. However, they did make some moves when it comes to trading for certain players. Ed Ingram will potentially start at guard. He might be a depth option. We'll see. Christian Kirk can be a bit more of your slot receiver. I like that pickup. But the CJ Gardner-Johnson one was the interesting one of the offseason. To trade CJ for Kenyon Green to me was kind of a steal. CJ is a very loud and vocal player. He might, I don't know, at times tick some people off. He's not for everybody, but he's a damn good player. Like he just is so versatile, can play multiple positions. And for a defense in Houston that was already solid and has so many good players, adding a guy like CJ Gardner-Johnson to me makes a ton of sense. Again, Kenyon Green, who was their first round pick a few years ago, just hasn't quite worked out for Houston. If it works out for the Philadelphia Eagles, that's great, but it probably wasn't going to work out for the Texans. So all in all, I felt like this was a bit of an up and down free agency class. I definitely don't hate it. I think there's a lot to look forward to with this class. Just to me, the Laramie Tunsil thing just still, even today, kind of throws me off a little bit. Now, real quickly, let's talk about the 2025 draft class for the Houston Texans. They did not have a first round pick. I believe they traded back to take Jaden Higgins in round 2. They also had a second round pick again for Ariante Ursery, round 3 for Jalen Knoll, another round 3 for Jalen Smith, round 4 for Woody Marks, round 6 for Jalen Reed. Great value there. Another round 6 for Graham Mertz, bit of a questionable one for me. Round 7, Keontae Hamilton, and another round 7 for Luke Lachey. So I kind of got this one-on-one. Some of the players down the board I'm not too familiar with, but for the most part, I know all these guys. I was a big fan of Jaden Higgins. I didn't hate the value at all at 34. I thought he was a fringe first-round pick. He's long, lengthy, athletic. He's not a freak athlete by no means, but a solid athlete. He catches everything. He's just a really solid possession receiver, and man, he just kind of reminds you a lot of like a Nico Collins type guy. And Nico Collins has missed some time in his career, so if you want to find a replacement for him when he's out, kind of think Jaden Higgins is like the perfect guy for that role. There was a lot of question marks with this receiving core for the Texans. Obviously, the trio from last year and Tank Dell and Nico and Stephon Diggs never really got to see that out because of injuries, which was super unfortunate. But you bring in a Jaden Higgins who can kind of be that Nico Collins replacement when Nico inevitably misses time, while also potentially being a full-time starter next to Nico. I mean, this is going to be a unit with some really good size, with good variety of different play styles, and I just really like what they did there with Jaden Higgins. The round 2 pick is Ariante Ursery. At one point, he was I don't want to say consensus, but he was thought to be a potential first-round pick. In the 2024 season, kind of had some ups and downs. Definitely was not bad by no means, but I think you started to see some flaws kind of get exploited at times. With that said, for the Houston Texans, you're going to get a huge tackle that can also stick inside to play guard. He was a captain for Minnesota. He's going to get you a lot of experience. He's a good player. I kind of have a feeling that he might be somewhat forced to start this year, whether it's at tackle or guard. I do have a feeling at some point you're going to see Ariante get some legit playing time in 2025. You brought in Jalen Knoll. He's a bit more of your inside the slot guy, not the biggest dude in the world, but he was productive for Iowa State. He also has experience playing next to Jaden Higgins, so when you throw in lineups mix of Jalen Noel, Higgins, and like Kirk, or Jalen Noel, Nico, and Higgins, and whatever might be else out there. Like, it's going to be pretty comfortable for Noel. It's going to be an easy, seamless fit. He's probably like your long-term replacement for Christian Kirk, because Kirk is on the roster. I'm sure you're going to see him out for a year, and then probably Jalen Noel will step in the year after. Then with their other third-round pick, they took Jalen Smith, the USC corner. I was not the biggest fan of Jalen Smith coming through the process. I kind of thought he was for sure like a middle to late day 3 guy. So when he was taken in round 3, I did not love the value of the pick. And I also don't think it really fixed a position of need for the Houston Texans. Like, he's probably going to end up playing somewhere in the nickel or in the safety, just because I don't think he's going to outplay a Kamari or a Derek Stingley to take one of those spots. But at the same time, you don't really need him at nickel because you already have like a Jalen Petrie who can play there. And in terms of safeties, you already have CJ Gardner-Johnson and Kalen Bullock. So to me, this pick was just a little bit weird. Now, Jalen Smith has some things that you would like to see from him. Like, he can play on the inside. He can play on the outside. I think he has at least some versatility. I do think when he's playing press coverage, he can look good at times on film, but I also think he could just be a little bit inconsistent at times too. He's not the greatest athlete. He's also not the greatest sized. I thought his 2024 film, compare that to what I saw in 2023, was a little bit better, but I didn't think it was so much better that you should take him at round 3. But they took him out round 3. I guess he'll be a bit of a depth option, and I don't know what's really going to end up being the position long term for him. I'm assuming it's at nickel, but my issue with this pick is I don't really see a pathway right now for him to be a full-time starter unless he somehow outplays Jalen Petrie or outplays whoever might be playing the nickel spot. Round 4, Woody Marks. He's more of your typical receiving running back. Like, you already have Joe Mixon. You already have Dameon Pierce. You add in a Woody Marks to be a bit more of that change of pace guy. That guy who can come in on 3rd and long and take a screen to the house. Like, he's a really solid athlete, more of a receiving back right now than a rushing back, but maybe a long-term can develop into becoming more of that full-time second guy next to a more pure runner. Jalen Reed last year played pretty well for Penn State. He was a 6th-round pick. He's a safety. Sometimes safeties fall down the boards just a little bit. I think he has some good qualities to his game, and for round 6, you're getting a guy who played a lot for Penn State, so this is a nice little depth option here. The Graham Mertz pick was a little bit weird, especially with all the quarterbacks that were still on the board, like Quinn Ewers. My issue with the Graham Mertz thing is you didn't really need a backup quarterback. You already had Davis Mills, and you already had CJ Stroud. So I don't know. Maybe Graham Mertz was just really impressive in meetings with them, and they view him as being a nice long-term culture fit and so on and so forth. So I don't know. That one was a little bit weird. And then the round 7s, Keontae Hamilton and Luke Lachey. I'm not too familiar with either one of those guys. So if you guys are, you can let me know in the comment section below. But more than anything, probably just depth options and special teams things. So then that brings me to the depth chart for the Houston Texans. We'll begin with the offense, where their starting unit looks fairly similar to what they had last year, especially within the weapons. Although you do bring in Christian Kirk, you have Cam Robb, you have now you have Trent Brown here as well as Ed Ingram and Laken Tomlinson and Ursary too. I think the receiving core is going to look a lot different next year. We don't really have much word on what's happening with Tank, whether he'll be back some point next year or if he'll be ready for the start of the year. My prediction is that he won't be ready for week 1, but might be a late addition late into the season. But I kind of feel like long term, you really don't need Tank Dell because you already have Christian Kirk. You also have Jalen Noel and John Mechie. So just a lot of guys that are healthier and play just as well as Tank Dell. Now, if Tank Dell comes back with a vengeance and returns back to that rookie form and can stay healthy, then sweet. That's awesome. But right now, it's a bit of an up in the air thing right now. So we'll have to wait and see. I do know him and CJ are pretty good friends. I really like this receiving core, though. It's deep, especially when Tank is back. There's different variety of guys, too, with different sizes, different skill sets. Like, Christian can play on the slot, but can also go to the outside. Noah can play on the slot, but also can go to the outside. John Mechie, slot guy. Higgins, Nico, more outside guys. And Tank Dell, kind of a do-it-all threat. So there's a lot of just variety here within this room that I'm actually pretty interested to see how it kind of works out. But then your offensive line, to me, is still a problem. I think this offensive line arguably is just as bad, maybe a little bit worse than last year. The only good thing about it is I think there's a lot of variety that this offensive line can look at. Like, there is at least some legit guys that can get some playing times off the bench. Right now, ESPN has the starting lineup as Cam Robb, Titus Howard, Jarrett Patterson, Juice Scruggs, and Blake Fisher. But I could also easily see a world where it's Cam Robb, Titus, probably Jarrett at the center, and then at guard and right tackle, like Trent Brown, Ed Ingram, or Laken Tomlinson, or Ursary. Like, there's so much variety with how this offensive line can go. So at the bare minimum, I do think that there is some just different options, right? You're not going to be forced to start this guy because you have at least some backups that can play. And because you have that variety, because you have that different options, you can kind of makeshift your offensive line from week to week to week until you ultimately get the offensive line you're most comfortable with. I also think that this offensive line should just be a little bit better from last year because CJ has more control of it, because he can shift them a certain way to prevent a free rusher. You don't have to rely so much on an offensive coordinator who's just seeing things from a booth. With CJ actually being on the field, he might be able to kind of help this offensive line. I still don't think this offensive line is going to be anything good. It'll still be probably a bottom 10 unit, but maybe it could just be slightly better because CJ's in a bit more command of it, and just because you have more younger options off the bench like Ariante Ursary. So all in all, I do worry about this offensive line. I think it's going to be, again, their Achilles for the season, but there is a potential chance it's better than what it was last year. And then there's the defensive side of things. A lot of things are very similar to last year. The only really big changes to this unit is, of course, CJ Gardner-Johnson steps in there. You also, of course, have Daryl Taylor, EJ Speed, Nick Neiman, and Jalen Smith coming off the bench. I expect this defense to be just as good, if not slightly better from what it was last year. It was a top 10 unit last year. I expect it to be a top 10 unit yet again. You have now some more depth, young options, and just variety to throw out there. So it'll be a good defense. I expect it to be damn solid. So in case you're wondering, this is the schedule for the 2025 season for the Houston Texans. I'm not going to go up this week by week, but just kind of at first glance, it looks to be a fairly winnable schedule. Later during the offseason, I'll do a season preview for the Houston Texans where I'll talk about these specific games and how many wins I think they're going to get. We'll get to that later in the offseason, as I mentioned, but just kind of like I said, at first glance, this is not the hardest schedule in the world. Like, I've seen some brutal schedules. The Detroit Lions have a brutal schedule. The New York Giants have a filthy schedule. This is not that bad. There's a lot of winnable games here. There's some tough ones. Like, you have the Rams in week 1, the Ravens, you play the Chiefs, you have the Bills. Like, those are some really good teams. But surrounding those tough games, you do have some easy ones like Jacksonville, Tennessee. You have both those teams twice. Indianapolis, they could suck next year. And just, you know, some winnable matchups against Arizona, Las Vegas, even the Chargers to some extent. So it's a pretty winnable schedule with a lot of games that should be entertaining, should be close. But I also do expect the Houston Texans to be right back in the mix of things for the playoffs. It also does help that the division the Texans play in isn't quite pushing it all up on the Texans quite yet. Like, if you look at the Titans, yes, they have a new quarterback, but they're still a year or two away from being contenders. The Colts are probably their biggest competition, but we don't know what we're getting from Anthony Richardson. So if AR is great, then okay, the Texans have some competition. But if AR sucks and Daniel Jones sucks, then the Texans are probably set. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, they should be better, and I think they have a shot to become playoff contenders, but I still think defensively they have some flaws that not too sure if Travis can fix all those issues. So we'll have to wait and see. I do think Jacksonville, though, will be a competitor against Texans. I just think right now the Texans are just a better team. So I think the Texans will make the playoffs, and I think they have a chance to make a potential deep playoff run, depending on what the next season looks like. I felt like last year, even though the Texans did win a playoff game and they got relatively far in the playoffs, it always felt like the Texans had a bit of a ceiling to them, like they were not going to win a championship. I do think that is the case this year for Houston, but I think that ceiling is slightly elevated just because they've made some changes to their offense, made some changes to the defense. Still worried about the offensive line, but I think with this new coordinator and the offensive side, it will be better. I do think 2026, though, is the year the Texans kind of should go all in. Stroud's still on a pretty cheap deal. That is the time where I think you have to seriously address the offensive line, make it one of the better units in the NFL, like the Bears did this past year. And then in 2026, we could be talking about the Houston Texans as one of the favorites to win it all. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, how many wins will the Houston Texans get in 2025? And if you enjoy, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.